Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching video number 2, Installing Virtual Server. In this video, we'll talk about how to determine the physical size of the server that you'll be installing Virtual Server on. Then we'll learn about how to obtain Microsoft Virtual Server and install Virtual Server. Once installed, we'll look at how to configure and use the administrative website. Then we'll learn about the Virtual Machine Remote Console. Before we get started, let's take a look at our scenario. Now, in our introduction video, we learned about our scenario with the Blue Crab Food Company. In this video, we'll perform our first step of that scenario, which is implementing the server virtualization project for the Blue Crab Food Company. Now, the first part of that, of course, is to install Virtual Server and familiarize yourself with the management interfaces and options. To do this, you'll have to download, install, and poke around Microsoft Virtual Server. Now let's talk about how to determine the physical size of the server that you'll need to install Microsoft Virtual Server on. To me, the first step in doing this is to ask yourself a number of questions. So ask yourself, how many virtual machines will I want to run at the same time or concurrently on my host computer? If it's just going to be one machine, many times your host computer can handle just running a single virtual machine. Say you allocate 256 megabytes to that virtual machine, and you had a gigabyte of RAM on your computer, you can easily run a single virtual machine. But when you start to run more than one, you really need to look at exactly how many you're running at the same time, how much RAM they'll be using, and what kind of impact this is going to have on the host computer as well as the virtual machines. So what will those virtual servers be doing? Are these going to be print servers, web servers, FTP servers, Exchange servers? Are these just test servers? Are these production servers? What sort of applications will you be running? You have to take that into account. Are these just single instances of Windows XP and you want to test some applications? In that case, they're not very resource intensive. On the other hand, is this a production Exchange server that you want to put into a virtualization environment? In that case, it's going to be extremely resource intensive. So how much RAM and disk will these virtual servers need? RAM to me is the biggest piece of the sizing of a virtual server. So take into account that each virtual server needs at minimum 256 megabytes of RAM on up to a gigabyte of RAM if it's a production server like an Exchange server. Um, you'll have to take that into account and add up the concurrent machines that will be running, add up the RAM requirements for those concurrent machines, then add in the host, how much RAM you need to allocate to the host, and that's your total amount of RAM that you'll need to run Microsoft Virtual Server. How much disk will these virtual servers need? Today's hard drives are pretty big, so many times if you're just running test machines or maybe web servers that don't require a lot of disk space, this isn't such a big deal. But sometimes you'll want to take snapshots or do copies of virtual machines or have different versions of virtual machines stored. Each one of those will take a huge chunk of disk space. So you have to take that into account. What kind of processor does my host computer have? If you just have a single, say 2 gigahertz processor and you want to run one virtual machine, well, you should be fine. On the other hand, if you want to run uh, a suite of 4 different, virtualized production servers, well, you're going to need at least a dual processor machine with some very fast processors. So that's something to take into account. Now, if this is going to be a production server, I recommend getting a processor that supports hardware-assisted virtualization. This is a new feature in Microsoft Virtual Server, and it's also a new feature on certain processors. Those processors are aware of the virtualization software, and they work together. And this improves performance. You could also look at getting a 64-bit processor, even if you're just running a test environment on a laptop or a PC. Running 64-bit operating system and 64-bit Microsoft Virtual Server will significantly improve performance. Now, to me, one of the best ways to size a new virtual server, if you're migrating it from a physical server, is to just look at how much the existing physical server's resources does that application consume. So if you're trying to migrate, say, an Exchange server to a virtual server, what's the current RAM and CPU and disk space requirements on that production Exchange physical server? Well, whatever are the current resource requirements for that server, you'll need to mirror those over in the virtual server environment, plus add any more resources that would be needed by the host operating system and other virtual servers running on that physical computer. Now keep in mind that virtual servers may not be good for resource-intensive applications. So if you have some server that's, say, a file server serving up huge graphic files, and those clients are, say, doing ad layouts or something that's very resource-intensive, and they need those files as fast as possible, virtual server may not be a good application for that type of resource-intensive application. Virtual server is ideal for consolidating less resource-intensive servers, say like domain controllers, DHCP servers, DNS servers, um, web servers, FTP, low resource-intensive FTP servers. That's what virtual server is ideal for. Virtual server may not be good for applications that need specialized hardware. Even hardware like USB tokens uh, isn't going to be supported with Microsoft Virtual Server. And hardware like PCI cards or ISA interface cards, specialized hardware like that is definitely not going to be supported. So take that into account when considering what servers to migrate into your virtual server environment. Now for your host operating system, I recommend either Windows XP Pro for your desktop testing non-production operating system or Windows 2003 Server for any production servers. I recommend a minimum of 512 megabytes of RAM for the host and 256 megabytes for each virtual machine. So if you're running 4 virtual machines, that's 4 times 256, that's a gigabyte, plus 512, that's 1.5 gigabytes. Now, to me, this is the minimum to get even, you know, minimally acceptable performance. So anything more than this would just be wonderful. And 256 megabytes isn't going to be enough to run certain types of servers. So keep that in mind. So the more RAM really you can get, the better. If you can put 3 or 4 gigabytes on your computer and run a handful of virtual servers and your host operating system, you'll be doing great. Now concerning disk space, you may easily use 5 gigabytes per virtual machine. Now with today's hard drives, that isn't a big deal really. But if you create multiple copies of your Microsoft virtual servers, those can easily eat up 5 to 10 gigabytes for every copy that you make. So keep that in mind. Now, I don't want to scare you away with the RAM requirements. Most people on a desktop PC, if you're running virtual server and you want to run a couple Windows 2003 servers, say, and create a production or a test environment to mirror your production, you can get away with 1 gig or 1 to 2 gig, I think, would be just fine to run a couple virtual servers. You'd be very happy with the performance of that. And 1 to 2 gig today on a desktop computer is relatively inexpensive. And last of all, don't forget licensing. For every copy of, say, Microsoft Windows 2003 server that you're running concurrently on your computer, you're required by law to have a license for that concurrent running copy of that operating system. So say you take a server and you run 4 different Microsoft Windows 2003 servers on it, you're required to have an operating system license for the host operating system plus the 4 different virtual servers. So that's 5 copies of Microsoft Windows 2003 Server that you're required to buy, say at $600 each. That's $3,000 worth of licensing right there. So, Microsoft Virtual Server is free, yes, but you still have to buy the Microsoft Windows licenses for whatever operating system you're running inside Virtual Server. Now let's take a look at the virtualization architecture. Microsoft Virtual Server is the software piece that runs in this virtual layer right here, this virtualization layer. But first, let's start down here with the host. This is the host computer. This is the physical hardware right here that your computer, this is representing your computer's physical hardware, CPU, RAM, disk, and local area network. On top of that, you have your host operating system. Might be Microsoft Windows XP or Windows 2003 Server. On top of that operating system, you're going to load the virtual server service. This is called vs.srvc.exe. This is going to be a service that's going to be running all the time on your computer, whether you're logged in or not. Inside that service, you're going to run your virtual machines, represented here by Virtual Machine 1 and Virtual Machine 2. Now, to interact with these virtual machines, you're going to typically do it in one of two ways. To configure the virtual machines and to start and stop those virtual machines, you're going to use the Virtual Server Administrative website. This is actually an application called vswebapp.exe, and it runs inside IIS. So it's a web application, so you'll be running your web browser to configure, start, and stop your virtual machines. Now, to do remote control at the console level, you'll be running the Virtual Machine Remote Console, or vmrc.exe. And we're going to be exploring these two different ways of administering and controlling your Microsoft virtual machines later in this video. But I just wanted you to see how the architecture of Microsoft Virtual Server is laid out. Down here you have your host and your operating system. On top of that, you run the vs.srvc.exe, the virtual server service, and your virtual machines. And then you configure and control them with these pieces of administrative software up here. Either a web application through IIS to configure and start and stop, or the virtual machine remote console, which we'll be demonstrating in just a little bit. So that's the virtualization architecture. Now let's actually download Microsoft Virtual Server and get it installed. So the first step in our process of installing Microsoft Virtual Server is, of course, to obtain a copy of Microsoft Virtual Server. Fortunately for us, this is free software, but registration is required. You can obtain Microsoft Virtual Server from the Virtual Server homepage at the Microsoft website. Here's the link right here. And the current version is Microsoft Virtual Server 2005, Release 2 Enterprise. There is no more Standard or Enterprise, it's only Enterprise. So this is the current version, 2005 R2 Enterprise. The current version at this time, I should say, at the time that I'm creating this video. Currently, they have available a Service Pack 1 that's currently in Beta 2 version for Microsoft Virtual Server 2005 R2. So this is a service pack. However, you cannot just download the service pack and apply the service pack to your current running version of Virtual Server. When you download the service pack, it includes the full version with the service pack included in the Beta 2 format. So we're actually going to be using the Service Pack 1 Beta 2 format. Make sure we get all the latest and greatest features. So I'll show you how to download and register to get this software. And I want to point out that Microsoft Virtual Server is small. It's only about 30 megabytes, the whole application. It's really amazing that a tiny application like that can do so much. It's a very powerful application. And when you do download the software, I highly recommend reading the release notes. You'll learn a lot of important information from the release notes. So with that, let's go to the Microsoft Virtual Server homepage on the Microsoft website. I'm going to click that link right there, and it's going to open our Windows Internet Explorer and take us to the Microsoft Virtual Server 2005 R2 homepage. So if I scroll down here, I can click here to get the free download. This is the regular production released version of Microsoft Virtual Server 2005 R2. I can also go here to get the Service Pack 1 Beta 2 version, and of course it includes the full version of Microsoft Virtual Server. So let's click here. And here it says that you can download Service Pack 1 Beta 2. This is how I'm going to obtain the software, or how I'm going to demonstrate us obtaining the software. You can get it in, of course, the 32-bit version and the 64-bit version. We're running a 32-bit processor, so we'll be downloading the 32-bit version. I'm going to click here to download the Virtual Server Beta software. And this takes us to the Microsoft Connect homepage where they have betas of all different types of software. Now currently I've already registered and I'm participating in the beta for Microsoft Virtual Server. So I'm going to log in. Requires a passport registration. I'm going to log on. And you can see here I'm participating in these two different betas. The Virtual Server 2005 R2 Service Pack 1 beta and the Microsoft Virtual Machine editions for Linux. So to download this, I'm going to click here on Virtual Server 2005 R2 Service Pack 1 Beta 1. And this takes us to the beta program information, and it tells us what's new. We already learned what's new in video 1 of this series, and so what we need to do now is just download the software. I'm going to click on Downloads, and here are the different pieces I can download. Specifically, what I want to download is Virtual Server 2005 R2 Service Pack 1 Beta 2, the 32-bit version. So I'm going to click here, and it says it's a 32 megabyte setup.exe file. I'm going to click Download. This brings us to the Microsoft Transfer Manager, and it says it's requesting to do a transfer, and I'm going to approve it by clicking Transfer. And it'll start to download this software. Currently it says it's queued, and you can see it'll start to download. Now we're not going to sit here and watch it download. Actually, what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to cancel this because I've already downloaded it. But I wanted you to see the process of downloading it. So I canceled it, and I'm going to close this out, close this website out, minimize this, and I'm going to go to My Documents, and I'm going to go to right here. I've actually downloaded both versions of Microsoft Virtual Server already. Now, originally these were called setup.exe, and I renamed them to have more verbose file names so I can tell exactly what they are. The first one is Microsoft Virtual Server 2005 R2 Enterprise. This is the production general release version of Microsoft Virtual Server. You can see it's a 29 megabyte application. This is the installation file for Virtual Server. The second one here is the Service Pack 1 Beta 2 that I was downloading just a second ago. Before I go forward with the installation of Microsoft Virtual Server, let's go back to our slides. And let's move on to our slide where we talk about installing Microsoft Virtual Server. Prior to installing Microsoft Virtual Server, you should make sure that you have your host's operating system updated with the latest patches and security drivers. I do this by going to windowsupdate.microsoft.com and running the automated security wizard on there that scans your computer to see, what patches you need to update. The second thing you need to do for Microsoft Virtual Server is you need to install IIS. That's the Microsoft Web Server that comes with either Windows XP or Windows 2003 Server. Now, if you're running Windows 2003 Server, you go to Manage My Server, and you tell Windows 2003 that you want your server to have the application server role. This really just adds Microsoft IIS, the web server. You'll need IIS because that's the administrative web page for controlling Microsoft Virtual Server. So you'll use your web browser, you'll connect to the IIS web server to make any configuration changes, add new virtual servers, remove virtual servers, anything you do with virtual server, you're going to be doing it through your web browser and Microsoft IIS. So IIS is a required component of Microsoft Virtual Server. Fortunately for us, it's free and it's included in the operating system media. But I suspect that for many of you, you might not have chosen to install that when you installed your operating system. So on Windows XP, I'm going to demonstrate exactly how to install Microsoft IIS. To do this, you go down to Add Remove Components down here in Start, Settings, Control Panel, go to Add Remove Programs, and then click on this, Add Remove Windows Components. And if I scroll down here a little bit, you'll see IIS. Whoop, there it is right there, IIS. If I check this box right here, that's going to install IIS. Let's go into details here. And it does by default check something we really don't need, which is SMTP service. I usually just take that off because you don't need it, and to me it's a security risk because that's the email server, and you really don't want an email server on your computer if you don't need one. All the other defaults are fine. I'll say OK, and we'll click Next. Now it prompts me for some files located on my Windows XP Service Pack 2 CD. I'm just going to change this from drive C to drive D because I do have that CD inserted into my computer, and I'll say OK. For some of you, you might have copied or one more file is needed. I'm going to again change that from drive C to D. So for some of you, you might have copied those Windows files to your hard drive, or maybe the company you bought your computer from copied those files to your hard drive. So you might have a directory on your hard drive, maybe it's called C:(I386), maybe not, where your Windows files are stored. So your computer might find those files and not prompt you for a CD at all, which in that case, you're much better off. It's a little bit more convenient. In any case, whether you have Windows XP or Windows 2003 server, you should make sure that you have your operating system CD available because chances are you will be prompted for it if you don't have those files already on your hard drive. So it goes through here, it installs Microsoft IIS. It takes just a minute or two longer and we'll be done. If by chance you already have Microsoft IIS installed and you're already using it for websites, you need to be very careful when you install Microsoft Virtual Server because it has its own administrative website and potentially you could have some conflicts with your existing web server. Just something that you'll have to be conscious of. Now, trainsignal.com, they offer a 8-hour training video just on Microsoft IIS. So if you're unfamiliar with IIS and how it works, or you run into some problems and you want to learn more about setting up IIS, that's a great training resource. So I'll say finish here now that IIS is installed. And we can close that out. So we successfully installed Microsoft IIS on this Windows XP workstation, which is going to be our host operating system for our Microsoft Virtual Server. So now let's look at a few other things you need to know. First off, in the middle of installing Microsoft Virtual Server, you will lose network connectivity momentarily. So this is something just to be aware of if, say, you're installing this on a production server. You don't want to do it while that server is being used for other tasks because it will lose network connectivity. Now, it's possible to perform an unattended installation of Microsoft Virtual Server. If you first create an MSI version of the setup program that we downloaded, you'll use this command here, setup.exe/c/t. Then you put in like c:\\, and it'll put an MSI file in that directory, and the MSI file will be called this, Virtual Server 2005 install.msi. Then you run this MSI ec.exe/i with the name of the file. You need to be in the directory where that file is. You put in your product key there, /qn, and you will install Microsoft Virtual Server completely unattended. Just something that's nice to know that you can do. Microsoft Virtual Server really doesn't take much time at all to install, so I don't see many people using that, but it's good to know that it's there if you need it. Now, once you install Microsoft Virtual Server, I highly recommend you take a look at the automated installation summary that will come up once it's installed. And then over on the Start menu, in the Program Files, you'll find the Getting Started Guide and the Virtual Server Administrator's Guide. These are great tools for learning more about Virtual Server. Now, the Administrator's Guide will provide you with customized links to the installation folder, the administrative website, and the documentation. And I'll show you that once it's installed. Now, all Virtual Server applications are stored in the Program Files/Virtual Server folder. And I'll show you that as well. And the All User Profile is where the virtual machines and virtual configurations are stored by default. It's not stored in your personal profile, it's stored in the All Users profile, and we'll be taking a look at that. And then by default, access to the administrative website is restricted to the local administrators group on that machine. But you can, of course, go in and change this. As long as you're administrator and you just installed it, you might as well go in and change it and set up access to whoever you feel will need access to administer Microsoft Virtual Server either from this machine or remotely. So with that, let's get started and let's go ahead and install Microsoft Virtual Server 2005. To do this, I'm going to go down to My Documents, and here I have my two different versions of Microsoft Virtual Server. I'm going to go ahead and use the Microsoft Virtual Server 2005 Release 2, and this is the Service Pack 1 Beta 2 version, of course 32-bit. So it's not a beta of Microsoft Virtual Server, it's just a beta of the Service Pack 1. The Service Pack 1, though, is included in the full install. So it's not like you add the Service Pack once you have it installed. It's all in this one file. So to do this, I'm just going to double click on that. And keep in mind, normally this would be called setup.exe. I just renamed it so you could see the difference between these two files. Okay, this comes up and says it's going to install Virtual Server 2005 R2 Enterprise Edition. And notice here it says Service Pack 1. So you can click here and view the release notes. Most of these things, though, we already covered in video number 1. So these are some of the new features and just things you need to know about when you install Virtual Server. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And let's just click Install Microsoft Virtual Server. We have to accept the license agreement and say Next. Here's our product key that was created for us when we downloaded this. It was just included in the setup.exe file. So it's not like a separate key that was really assigned to us necessarily that you have to type in. It's already included in there. But if you were going to do an unattended install, you would take this key and go use it in your unattended install file. So I'm going to put in my name as the username, and the organization, of course, that we're doing this for is the Blue Crab Food Company. I'll say Next. Let's do a custom installation just so you can see the different features or options that are available when you install. So here you can choose to individually install the Virtual Server service, the documentation, the Virtual Machine Remote Control Client. This is the Virtual Machine Console, or the VMRC. There's the VHD Mount. This is a tool to mount offline virtual hard disk. And then there's the Virtual Server Web Application. This is the Administrative Console. So you can individually choose to install the different pieces you want. Like say you wanted to just install the remote control client on a separate machine, you could use the same installation to install that. However, it's just a single executable file, so most people don't do that. So we'll just take all the defaults and we'll install everything. I'll click Next. Now, because we're installing this on Microsoft Windows XP, we don't have an option here to change the website port because this version of IIS does not allow multiple websites. However, if you were installing this on Microsoft Windows Server 2003, you would have an option here. In fact, it says 1024 is the default port, but you might want to change that to whatever port you want to use for administrative control. Now, in the case of this installation, our installation for the Blue Crab Food Company, port 80 is the only choice because of the version of IIS we're choosing. So I'm just going to click Next. Now it says to remotely access virtual server through a firewall, this requires additional configuration. If you're using Windows Firewall, setup will add exception entries to allow correct operation. If you're using a different firewall product, see the Virtual Administrator's Guide for details about configuring your firewall for use with virtual server. Now, we're just going to take the default here. If you're using Windows Firewall, this will go in and create exceptions in the Windows Firewall so that you can remotely control your virtual servers from somewhere else on the network. Now, if you're doing everything on just this one computer, you don't really need any exceptions. So I'll say Next. And it says, are you ready to install? It will be installed in this directory, C:"program files, Microsoft Virtual Server. And it points out you will lose network connectivity for a few seconds while setup installs the virtual machine network services. So we'll click Install. And this will just take a few minutes. It's pretty fast. And you will see me lose network connectivity when the virtual machine network services are installed. Still going, we're almost done. So it automatically popped up for us this installation summary back here, and it says that Microsoft Virtual Server has been successfully installed. Click Finish to complete. We click Finish, and we're all done. That's it. Installing Virtual Server is very easy. Here you see the installation summary that automatically came up. This shows you the installation folder, the administrative website, access control, and documentation links. So let's take a look at some of these. First off, the installation folder. If I click on this, this takes me to the installation folder C:"program files, Microsoft Virtual Server. So this is where the programs are actually installed. And in here you can go in and you can see little things like the VMRC client. Here's the actual application. Now you can take this application and you could copy it off to some other computer, and there's your little remote control client to control your virtual servers. Very easy. However, with that client you cannot administer or change Microsoft Virtual Server. You can only control, or should I say remote control, your Microsoft virtual machines. There's other things in here like the VHD mount utility, and a number of other things like documentation. Most of these things can be accessed by going to the Start menu, Programs, and to Microsoft Virtual Server. Here you'll see many of the things that are already listed in there. The installation summary we were looking at, the release notes, and the Getting Started guide, the virtual machine remote control client, a link to the administrative website, which is really just an HTTP website. You see that right there. Right there, the client status HTTP 1. I'll show it to you in just a second. The Virtual Server Administrator's Guide. This is a great resource for learning more about Virtual Server. So if we close this out, the second thing it shows us here is the administrative website. That's what I said I would show you. This is really just an HTTP site right here that takes us to client 1, which is the name of this computer that I installed Microsoft Virtual Server on. So if you installed it on a server called Server 2003 or App Server 1, whatever the name might be, that's the name that's going to be in this HTTP URL right here. Notice it takes us to port 80. If this was a Server 2003 operating system, it would take us to 1024. And then here's the different virtual server, part of the URL right here. So let's just click on this. And this is taking us to the administrative website for Microsoft Virtual Server. Now, you do have to log in because this machine is not on a domain. So I'm going to log in just with the same account that I'm already logged in with. It is an administrative account, so I have full administrator privileges. And this is the administrative website for Microsoft Virtual Server. We'll be learning more about this and spending a lot of time in this administrative website in this video and future videos. So let me close that out for now. And let's go back to that installation summary. So we looked at the administrative website. Here's the access control. It points out to you that only the administrators group, the local administrators group, has access to the administrative website. But you can change this by going to Server Properties, Virtual Server Security. So that might be something you want to do if you want this computer's virtual server administrative website to be administered from some other maybe computer with some other user account that isn't part of a local administrators group. And then here's the documentation. If I click on this, this takes me to the documentation folder. But really these documents here, I recommend you access those just by going to Start, Programs, Microsoft Virtual Server, and here they are right here, the Virtual Server Administrator's Guide, Programmer's Guide, Release Notes, Installation Summary, the Getting Started Guide. So really this is all your documentation, and it's much easier to get to right here instead of going to the folder on the hard drive. So for now, let's close that out. Let's close that out. And let's go back to our slides here for just a second. So we said that the virtual server applications are stored in Program Files, Virtual Server. We saw that. We looked at that folder. And then the All Users Profile is where your virtual machines and virtual machine configurations are stored by default. Let's go take a look at that. If I minimize this and I go to My Computer, go to my C drive, go to Documents and Settings. Notice here I have a couple user accounts, but then there's also the All Users folder. If I go into that All Users folder, notice here's the shared documents, and here's the shared virtual machines and shared virtual networks. These folders were created by default when Microsoft Virtual Server was installed. And they're here so that all users can access the shared virtual machines. This folder is available to all users that log on to this computer. And if I go into shared virtual machines, it just so happens that previously I have installed Microsoft Virtual Server on this machine, and that's why I have a virtual machine already in here. By default, you wouldn't have a virtual machine in here. But for purposes of demonstration, I wanted to make sure we had a virtual machine available so that I can show you how to configure the virtual machine. So if you go in here, here's the virtual machine hard drive, which is a 3.6 gigabyte file. And here's the virtual machine configuration file. We'll be learning more about these in future videos. If I go up, here's the shared virtual networks. So here's our different virtual machine networks, or these are actually VNC, Virtual Network Configuration files. Now I've loaded this before, and so I have maybe more virtual machine networks than you might have by default. But this is where those networks are stored. Each of these files represents a network, and we'll learn a lot more about virtual machine networks. At this point, I just want to show you where these different files are located on the hard drive. So let's close this out. So back here in our slides, we can now move on to configuring Microsoft Virtual Server. Now let's learn about configuring and using the Microsoft Virtual Server Administration website. Now the Virtual Server Administrative Interface is purely web-based, so you can do remote control of the servers using some other product, but to configure and administer Microsoft Virtual Server, the actual servers themselves is what I'm talking about. You have to use Internet Explorer and the web interface. Now, remote control can be done, of course, through the VMRC, and the VMRC can either be a web plugin, so you can actually do remote control in what looks like a web interface, but it's really an ActiveX VMRC plugin for your web interface. Or you can use the standalone client, and we'll be looking at the virtual machine remote console next. You could, of course, if you had it configured on your virtual machines, you could use some sort of standard remote control software like Microsoft Terminal Services or Remotely Anywhere or PC Anywhere. Whatever software you want to install on those virtual machines, you could use for remote control. However, you're not going to gain access to the console of the server like you would with VMRC. With VMRC, if the server is at the BIOS, you can still see the server's console with VMRC. Now, for the administration website, the default paths are right here. In Windows XP, this is the default path. And notice I said that client 1 right here would be replaced with the name of your server. If you're on your local server, you could even replace that client 1 with localhost or the localhost IP address, which is 127.0.0.1. If you're on Windows 2003, it's the same URL, but it has :1024 here by default. Now in Microsoft IS on Windows 2003, you could go in and you could change 1024 to some other port number. Now if you're connecting to a server via RDP services and then you try to run the Virtual Server Administrative Web Interface, you may encounter trouble. So say I'm on this computer here. I have a Microsoft Virtual Server out on my network. I connect to that virtual server using Terminal Services or RDP. And then from there, I try to run the Virtual Server Administrative Web Interface. You're going to have a problem. If so, you can change the URL on that computer to, instead of running it for the host name of that computer here, you change it to localhost. And that will work. That will get you into the web interface. Or you connect to that server using the Terminal Services client with the /console switch. Just FYI, a troubleshooting procedure, but that's only if you're using remote or RDP terminal services to connect to a server running Microsoft Virtual Server. In fact, if you're doing that, why not just connect to the web interface directly from your computer to that computer? Anyway, I'll be demonstrating a number of these things a little bit here in the rest of the video. Now, one thing I want to point out is that you're welcome to bookmark pages of the administrative web console. So as we go through the web console here and we look at different pieces, say like the network configuration, you can bookmark the URL to that. So in your Internet Explorer, you could have bookmarks for each of the different sections of the Microsoft Virtual Server Administrative Web Interface. So with that, let's take a look at this web interface. We already went in once, but to access it, you go to Start, Programs, Microsoft Virtual Server, the Virtual Server Administration website. It's going to prompt me to log in. Let me maximize the window here so you can see all of it. And I'm running Microsoft Internet Explorer 7, IE 7. I'll recommend using an Internet Explorer version, not a Firefox, because there are ActiveX controls in here that may or may not work on other web browsers. So the only reason I have a client right here, a virtual machine in this section, is because I copied that over to make a virtual machine available to us for demonstration purposes. Normally, by default, you wouldn't have a virtual machine already installed with Microsoft Virtual Server. Now in the next video, we'll be installing a brand new virtual server client, and we'll have another one in here. So don't worry about not knowing how to install a client yet, because we'll be getting to that. So right now we're in what they call the master status. See over here it says master status in bold. That's because that's the section that we're in, is the master status. So this shows us our clients, and notice it says this client, its status is off. It's powered off, and it has NA for runtime and CPU usage. So if I put my mouse over this, I can edit the configuration. I can turn this computer on, or I can remove this computer. Down here I have recent events for client 1. So this is kind of like an event log for client 1. And then over on the left I have my navigation menus. So we're in master status. Let's go down the list here. Here I can go to the virtual machine manager and I can switch virtual server. So I could say I want to control some other virtual server with this web interface. I don't have any other virtual servers at this point, so we're not going to use that. Then here we have the virtual machines section. This is where you create new virtual machines or you add virtual machines. Now you might be thinking, what's the difference between those? That's kind of weird. Create means you're creating a brand new virtual machine from scratch. Add means that you already have a virtual machine on your computer, the files for that virtual machine. Maybe you got it from somebody else. Maybe they gave you a copy of their virtual machine. Add just means you tell the administrative website to go get those files on disk and bring them in to this administrative website. Create means you're actually installing an operating system from scratch. Then here we have configure. With configure, we can choose to configure whichever of our clients we have installed. Right now we only have one, so we can only configure that one client. Here we have virtual disk. Here we can create new virtual disk, and we'll go into this in future videos. There are various kinds of virtual disk, but this is where we would create those. Here we can inspect virtual disks, sort of a validity checker or an inspection program, kind of like a check disk for our virtual machine disk drives. Here's the virtual network section. Here we can create new virtual networks, or we can add virtual networks if we have configuration files that are already on disk for virtual networks that aren't added. So it's these add features that you have for virtual networks and for virtual machines are really cool because they're tailored towards you getting a virtual network or a virtual machine from someone else, and then you're sort of importing it into virtual server. Here you can configure virtual networks that we already have on this computer. And we'll get into configuring and adding and creating virtual networks in future videos. Then down here is the virtual server properties just for this virtual server, just for the virtual server website, resource allocation, and then the event viewer. Back here at our slides, let's move on and talk next about the virtual machine remote console. Now the VMRC is the only way to access the console of a virtual server. It's a tiny client located at this path, Program Files, Microsoft Virtual Server, VMRC Client /vmrc.exe. Now it can easily be moved to other computers, and it can be used to connect back to your virtual machines. There's no installation necessary of the client. You'll need to know the path to the VM to use the VMRC. It cannot find your VMs for you. It cannot find your virtual machines for you. So you need to know the exact path of your virtual machine that you want to control over the network. So in just a second, I'll show you this path I'm talking about. Now the VMRC is not a fully featured remote control client like Terminal Services or Remotely Anywhere or PC Anywhere. So you cannot do a lot of the things you can do in those other clients like file transfer or sharing printers or anything like that. The VMRC is strictly to control the console of the remote machine, and really that's about it. So don't expect to get a lot out of it, but really to do just about anything you need to do on the remote computer that just involves clicking, nothing like file transfers or chatting or printing, you can do with the VMRC. And what's special about the VMRC is, like I said, it's the only way to access the console. So even if that remote machine is in the BIOS mode, or that computer tried to boot up and it's hung, or it's at a blue screen, you can see that with the VMRC, whereas you wouldn't be able to see that with, say, Microsoft Terminal Services or some other type of remote control client. So with that, let's take a look at the VMRC. Now, the first thing I need to do is I need to go and start up my virtual machine. To do that, I'm going to go down here to the Virtual Server Administrative website. I'm going to uh, go right here to the server. This is the demo server that I installed, and it's called Windows 2003 Server. That's the name of the virtual machine. So if I go here and I hover my mouse over this, I can go over here and I can click Turn On. So I just started this virtual machine. Notice the CPU graph starts up over here, and there's a blip of CPU usage. And here's a remote screen thumbnail of what that computer looks like when it's running. So now let's use the VMRC to go and see what this computer is doing. So if I go to Start, I go to Programs, Microsoft Virtual Server, then I go to Virtual Machine Remote Control Client, or also known as the Virtual Machine Remote Console. If I click on this, here is the path to the virtual machine I want to control. This path is very important. You need to understand how this works. So it gives you an example down here of vmrc:// computer domain.com. This could also be an IP address, :5900, which is the default port, / and then this is the name of the virtual machine. So right here, this virtual machine name, Windows 2003 Server, that's what needs to go in right here. Well, just so happens I already have the path in here for us, so we can just click Connect, and this shows us the console of this remote server. So you can see it says the Windows server is starting up. Here we're running the VMRC. So it tells you up here the name of the computer, and it's on localhost, and we're using the virtual machine remote control, or virtual machine remote console. If I click here, I can send special keys like Control-Alt-Delete, send print screen, send Alt print screen, and they have to have this because if I press Control-Alt-Delete here on my local computer, it would perform a Control-Alt-Delete on my local computer, not on this virtual server that I'm controlling. So it says I can either click here to do it, or I can actually use this host delete right here. Now the host key by default is the right Alt button on your keyboard. Not the left Alt button, but the right Alt button. So I'd hold down the right Alt button and I'd press delete, and that would send a Control-Alt-Delete to the virtual server that I'm working on. Here I can connect to the server. I can switch to administrator display, switch to full screen, look at my connection properties. Here's the properties here, things like resolution, the version of VMRC. I can go back here to remote control. I can do view only, send the host key, switch to another virtual machine, the next virtual machine, the previous virtual machine, and then here I can learn about the remote, the VMRC. So it shows this computer's booting up, and the computer has successfully booted. To press Control-Alt-Delete here, again I hold down the right Alt key and I press delete. This sends Control-Alt-Delete and I can log on. So this is the VMRC. So I could be doing this over the network to some other remote virtual server that's running not on this computer, or I could do it to a server that's on this computer just like I am now. So if I close this out and go back here, notice this little thumbnail view has changed. It looks just like our VMRC. I can actually launch a web version of the VMRC from this web-based administrative interface. So if I click here, a pop-up comes up and it says this website wants to install the following add-on: Virtual Server VMRC ActiveX Client Control. So this is actually an ActiveX installation of the VMRC. So if I click here, I can install this ActiveX control. I'll say install, and you just have to do this, of course, the first time that you're trying to use the VMRC web version. It says here the information you exchange with the server can be viewed by others on the network. Someone could use a protocol analyzer to examine this data and extract private information. For more details on using encryption to prevent others from viewing this data, consult the online help. So it's saying this because notice I'm accessing this with an HTTP URL. So if I was going over the network, over the local area network or wide area network, or potentially even over the internet, the things I send and receive could be viewed by others because the HTTP protocol is not encrypted. Now there are ways to change to HTTPS and encrypt this data. For now, I'm going to say don't ask me again. This really isn't a security risk because, of course, these virtual machines are running on this local computer. So I'm really not going over the network at all. I'm just staying all on the same computer. Do you wish to continue? I'll say yes. And again, it's prompting me for my username password. I'm going to go ahead and type that in. And it says you're using NTLM authentication. That's because we're using NTLM, we're not using HTTPS. I'm going to say don't ask me again and continue. And here we go. We're at the same console that we were using the VMRC. And up here we have the same options that we had. So this is really just a web-based version. You can see with the resolution that I'm at, it makes it kind of hard to actually see the whole screen because I have to scroll up and down here like this. So it's not very handy on a screen resolution like this, but if I had a higher resolution screen, I could potentially see the whole thing and do remote control. Also, again, the screen is this size of the remote server because it's set at a certain resolution, 640 by 480. If it was set at a higher resolution, I would have to scroll even more. So take that into account. Down here, I have some other administrative web controls. I can pause the state of this computer, save the state, shut down the guest OS, or turn off this computer. So if I press, again, Right, Alt, and Delete, there we go, I'm prompted to log on to this computer. So that's the VMRC. This is the web-based VMRC. We saw the standalone client. And with that, I can close this out, and we'll be back here at our slides. And with that, we've reached the conclusion of video number 2, installing Microsoft Virtual Server. In this video, we determined the size of our physical server. We learned that we have to take into account CPU, RAM, disk, and network requirements. The most important requirement to take into account is the amount of RAM you'll need, and take into account what the servers will be doing that you're planning on running inside Microsoft Virtual Server. We learned how to obtain Microsoft Virtual Server. In our case, we downloaded the beta version with Service Pack 1 included, and we installed that successfully. You saw how that worked. Prior to doing that, we needed to install Microsoft IIS. Once it was installed, we learned how to configure and use the administration website for Microsoft Virtual Server. Everything that you do inside Microsoft Virtual Server is configured using the web interface. Then we learned how to use the virtual machine remote console to perform remote control of these virtual machines that are running on Microsoft Virtual Server. And again, the administrative website and the VMRC, those can both be used over a local area network or wide area network. So they don't have to be limited to just this one local computer that's actually your virtual server. So we got a great start on installing and configuring Microsoft Virtual Server in this video. In future videos, we'll be doing a lot more in-depth configuration of Microsoft Virtual Server. I hope you'll stay tuned. Thanks a lot.